Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another science post. This one is going to be on wigner rotation. It sounds like it's complicated, but it's something that I think even kids would understand. When I was a kid, the concept of being on a spinning earth bothered me because it seemed like something I should be able to feel. Yet, when I laid down on a merry-go-round with my head on the outer rim, or if I went on the spinning barrel ride at the amusement park, I would feel the centripetal force and I would see the rotation. But if I closed my eyes, I didn't feel the rotation. I only felt the outward centripetal force, and it was hard for me to understand why. Worries about not feeling the spin of the planet were trained out of me with the incantation, "But everything around you is accelerating along with you, so you can't see the effect relative to anything else." Although I must say that this explanation didn't fully satisfy me because I thought I should be able to feel the rotation. I can feel the rotation when I twirl around like a ballerina. Why should lying on a merry-go-round be any different? I think that to really understand why I didn't feel the rotation of the merry-go-round when I closed my eyes, I needed to understand something known as wigner rotation. In the picture in the blog post linked below, you see a wigner rotation of rocket ships traveling around a planet. If the rocket ships didn't rotate, they would point in the wrong direction as they orbit the planet. They wouldn't be, I guess what you'd call tidally locked, like the moon is. So the moon must have a wigner rotation, because it only shows us one face. We never see the backside of the moon. The wigner rotation only exists within a Lorentzian-Lagrangian framework in a curved, relative, Riemannian coordinate system. This framework best describes a system like sand blowing in the wind, and the intuition required for those systems is very different from the intuition you develop from playing with water in your bathtub. That sort of physics is better described without any wigner rotation within a Galilean Eulerian framework in a straight, absolute Cartesian coordinate system. It is important to note that people naturally think in a Cartesian coordinate system, and they get very confused when they try to apply their Cartesian intuition to a Riemannian system. But this is technical stuff that you only need to know if you're a physicist or an engineer. A regular person only needs to understand merry-go-rounds, or these little spinning wheels in kids' playgrounds. As your merry-go-round spins, the particles in your head must rotate relative to their centers, whereas relative to the center of the merry-go-round, the particles in your head are not rotating. They are tidally locked, like the moon in orbit around the Earth. We only see one face of the moon because it is tidally locked to the Earth. If one were able to feel the spin of the Earth, they would need to be able to sense the slow rotation of the particles in their own head. And either we have evolved so that we can't feel that, or that's what we feel when we have a sense of how much time has passed, when we're just sitting around. There's some little monitoring system in our head measuring the slow rotation of the particle. I like that image. A physicist might say that our motion is best approximated as linear, and that makes us feel like we are in an inertial reference frame, even though we really aren't. The acceleration we experience due to the rotation of the Earth only manifests as a Coriolis force, and is something that we can see through the behavior of a pendulum. That's what a physicist would say, but those sorts of explanations, while correct, never ever satisfied my inner child. I prefer to understand this in terms of we do feel the rotation of the Earth, and we feel it when we feel time passing. That's what the rotation of the Earth, that's what acceleration feels like, time passing. So simple. I first learned about wigner rotation in the context of synchrotron radiation from tilted microbunches of electrons. In the blog post linked below, there is a depiction of the concept in terms of rockets. And if you understand the rotation in both microscopic and macroscopic terms, I believe that you understand almost everything you need to know about physics. There isn't a magic equation, there is just a mental animation that each individual has to find through his or her own imagination. The next step is connecting that animation to Maxwell's equations in different coordinate systems and understanding the ways in which we can approximate these equations. There are different approximations leading to two different sets of Maxwell's equations. I did that in another post, and I found an author who seems to have expressed this discrepancy in a language related to the wigner rotation, which I find interesting. I'll quote him, Matt Visser. The rate of change of the wigner rotation gives the Thomas precession rate, d omega over dt. The Thomas precession angle omega t is the total infinitesimal wigner rotation turned through after one orbit by Bob, who's on Earth, I guess. The gray spaceships represent Bob, okay, you need to see the picture to understand this, but it's just another illustration of how many parallel private languages there are in physics. We say things in so many different ways when I think it's possible to have a more unified language. I think that this wigner rotation is the most important concept to understand in physics because it illuminates the difference between sand blowing in the wind in a Lorentzian Lagrangian approach to particle mechanics, within a curved relative Riemannian space that requires wigner rotations, and the difference between that and water flowing in a bathtub in a Galilean Eulerian approach within a straight absolute Cartesian space that does not require the concept of wigner rotation. The difference between these two frameworks is also nicely illuminated through the question of how a gyroscope or spinning wheel works. If you've ever held a bicycle wheel and spun it while holding onto the axle, you'll remember how it was hard to turn the wheel. It felt like it had gotten heavier in the lateral direction. But why did this happen? Why, when you spin a fidget spinner and you try to spin it, is it heavier when you try to twist it? It resists the twist. The traditional answer is in terms of abstract concepts like gyroscopic force and conservation of angular momentum. But I like an answer given in terms of moving particles and conservation of energy. concepts that are easier for me to mentally animate. So, of course, if physics on the macro and micro scale are consistent, as they must be, then these two answers should be equivalent. In the blog post, there's a nice video demonstrating gyroscopic force in a rather extreme way. It's one of those Veritasium videos. They're usually pretty good. In the language of rotation and vibration on a molecular level, why does a spinning bicycle wheel feel heavier in the plane perpendicular to the rotation? I believe that to explain the lateral heaviness of a current of mass flowing in a circle, as in a bicycle wheel, you need a Wigner rotation of the individual particles. Every time they move forward in their loop, they also rotate. Rotation of a particle produces a field perpendicular to the rotation. This field will increase the lateral force between the particles in the current of mass. When those particles are not able to spread out laterally because of electromagnetic forces within the material, this lateral force will be reflected and turned into a vibration which causes the bicycle wheel to feel heavier in the lateral direction when it is spinning. Of course, given the conservation of energy, this makes the wheel feel lighter in the opposite plane. One can also deliver this explanation in the language of dark matter, contracting or increasing the density of space around the wheel laterally, and dark energy expanding or decreasing the density of the space around the treads of the wheel when it spins. But this would be highly unconventional. It is, however, easy to imagine if you picture a bicycle wheel spinning underwater. In the Eulerian treatment of the system, there is no Wigner rotation because there are no particles, and there is no contraction or expansion of space. Everything takes place in absolute Cartesian space that does not expand or contract when things move. If you have been able to visualize all of this, then you will understand why the Eulerian treatment is necessarily Galilean and in straight absolute Cartesian space, while the Lagrangian treatment is necessarily Lorentzian and in curved relative Riemannian space. Vortices define a particle, and the centers of particles obey the Lagrangian treatment. Vortices can also be described within an Eulerian treatment. However, analytic solutions are few and far between, and that is why the Lagrangian treatment is more often used, even though it removes a person's connection to their intuition through the use of a warped coordinate system. Meanwhile, the creation and destruction of vortices is described by quantum thermodynamics and entropy, and a Lagrangian approximation therefore is given by the treatment of synchrotron radiation within the Liénard-Wiechert potential. Because singularities occur in this potential, we know that it is an approximation of something that might be more accurately described with an Eulerian numerical simulation of fluid dynamics. Returning to the bicycle wheel, when the wheel gets heavier laterally and lighter in the plane of rotation, equipartition suggests that if the vortices in the lateral plane are vibrating more in a quantum thermodynamic system, this would require an increase in the number of vortices in that plane. Conservation of energy demands that the increase in the number of vortices in one plane should decrease it in the other. That is why a bicycle wheel doesn't radiate heat when it spins. It is also why electrons don't radiate away all of their energy when they orbit an atom. But that is on another length scale entirely. I think I will conclude this video by confusing you with a question that does not have a clear answer. If thermodynamic equipartition is the law of the land, does a bicycle wheel vibrate when it spins? I think this doesn't have a clear answer because this is a recursively defined system, and such systems necessarily produce contradictions when they are investigated with yes-no questions. I think that Socrates would understand why. Thank you for watching, and please tune in for my next video.